Hello, and welcome to the Argyle CISO Leadership Forum, Cloud Security and Governance. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed keynote speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. Throughout today's event, you will also have the opportunity to win one of several prizes. So be sure to check out the prizes and raffle rules tab of the interface to see how you can earn points. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat. We will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, Rick Doughton, VP and Health Plan CISO, Center Corporation.
Thank you, Nick.
Corporation. Yeah, we're super excited. Thanks so much for doing this, Rick. Over to you.
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled to be here. And hello, everybody. I'm coming to you from beautiful Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm real excited to talk about this topic. It's one that's very broad. I know the previous panel, which unfortunately wasn't able to see, had a discussion about this topic in the cloud. And I will be hitting on some of that, but trying to back out a little bit in talking about different compliance and governance, especially. So feel free to ask questions as I go along. I'll see them in the chat as we go, but let's just go ahead and get into it. My first slide here, I'm kind of talking, and I apologize, I don't have a reference for this. I like put together my slides and I went back and get the references and I forgot where I got this, but this was a worldwide group that asks senior IT leaders, why is privacy important to the business? And here's what they came with. And so first and 35% is to comply with, legal requirements. There are obviously regulations for data protection and data privacy across the world. I'll be going into some of those a little later. Second, and 20% is to improve their reputation among their customers, because this is one thing that me as a CISO, we try to not just be the cost center, but something that's of value to the business. And to be valuable to the business, we're bringing that trust to our beneficiaries or our customers or our partners as needed. And 16%, and I'm reading it because I know it's kind of small, it's to help manage the data they collect. And so just knowing and being able to categorize the data is important. And so that's why privacy, because I can't protect what I don't know about, and being able to manage my data and knowing which ones are relevant to different regulations or important to my customers that I'm holding as a steward is there. And 14% to gain competitive advantage, because if I feel like people think that I'm more secure than others, that might be great. And then 10% to align with the corporate values of, doing good and not doing harm and not being able to exploit people based on the data. But I want to highlight that the 35% is really complying with legal requirements. So looking at the US requirements, I just kind of listed the US ones here. Again, I'll kind of touch on the international ones, but if I was going to go into the international ones, it would be a whole other hour conversation. So initially, it was a 1974 law, 50 years ago, that established privacy. Very different than Europe, which established their privacy laws in the 40s based on events that happened in Europe in the 40s. Also very interesting is that European privacy law is based on discrimination. It's like whether I'm blue-eyed, left-handed, my race or my religion is based on, so I can't be discriminated against. In the US, our privacy law is about preventing from harm. So if I have your name, social security number, date of birth, I can steal your identity. I can get loans on your behalf. I can understand things about you. I can do things to kind of harm you. And so that's like two of the fundamental things that will probably come up a little bit later we talk about it. The next one here, GLB has Graham-Leach-Bliley. This is specifically for financial institutions. When that rule came out about 25 years ago, it was about, hey, we should probably protect people's financial information, because if people see that, then they may, again, be harmed by knowing you have a lot of money, I'm going to steal it, or you don't have a lot of money, or steal it, or I'm going to exploit you for it, or that you don't have a lot of money, I can then deny you things because you don't have a lot of money. HIPAA and high tech is healthcare portability. This is in my industry. Centene Corporation is a large health insurance payer, public healthcare, and so the this is what we kind of follow, and there's protecting your healthcare information, again, to protect from harm. If someone has healthcare information or knows things about you, they can discriminate against you, use that to against you, and other things. um, New York has a data financial service, one themselves. New York State has one. They have specific rules about protecting financial data in New York State. The FTC has a couple of new things coming up, new things that have come out. One is about breach notification. HIPAA is around healthcare organizations. We call they're kind of referred to as covered entities. So whether a payer like us, a provider like a hospital or doctor's office is a covered entity, anyone who supports us that may be managing the data for us or doing analytics for us or doing payments for us is a business associate, and we have agreements with those. And according to high tech, we are responsible for anything happening to those business associates, which is why we need to lock them down. But if you're not a covered entity or business associate, then HIPAA doesn't apply to you. So FTC said, hey, there's all these health app and these wearables and these things. And, um, Apple is not a covered entity, and they're not even a business associate because they're not supporting a covered entity specifically. They are just collecting healthcare data, whether it's my heart rate or how many miles I walked or whatever, my EEG that's on there now, EKG, EEG, that is health data. So FTC came out with a separate rule to say, hey, you need to protect that information even if you're not covered entity. COPA is about protecting kids. It's the that's why you probably see like no one under 13, needs a parental. People under 13 need parental consent, and then FTC has a new commercial surveillance and data security rule about those things that are collecting information. Again, not specific to a business, but if I'm collecting video or audio or anything related to you that could identify who you are, then make sure that you're protecting it to some consistency. So I hadn't said anything about privacy, and that's because I wanted to kind of put it on a map. There is no national privacy law in the United States. Um, uh, for certain, I mean, of course, I said there's a 1974 law. There's the one that I mentioned. The 2024 Act is trying to become a national privacy law. The reason for that is each of the states have been managing it. So, as normal, California is usually the first off the block, and I'm going to show you a map from 4 years ago and show the difference in how we've matured in the last 4 years. But if you count here, I think there's 17 green states that have their own privacy legislation where they define what are the privacy elements, what is the disclosure requirements, what is the means to be able to identify and give remediation to that issue and to the people when it happens. And then, as you can see through the legend here, that there's a handful of them that are in committee, a handful of them are still in play. The some of them are bills that kind of got stuck in the process, and some that aren't thinking about it at all. But I want to highlight that there are 17 states in play that have signed laws right now, and probably another 10 that are about to come out. And we go back to, let's see, this is 2001. So just even 3 years ago, and we look at the colors changed. The red ones, there were only two. Virginia and California. And then I know that Massachusetts was right after that. Colorado was after that. Texas was right after that. And interestingly, see, Florida was in committee 3 years ago, and now it just kind of died. But this is something that's getting more attention because we're understanding it. Also, we have in when I talk about, I'll just go ahead and go expand to Europe and the rest of the world. So this is a list of those countries that either have a lot of data protection, which includes privacy laws, and those who have less ones. And so red, yellow, green, and then orange. Robust is an interesting category for me. And so, and we look at these countries. So obviously the US and Canada and Mexico all have, and I did a lot of work in Canada and Mexico when I was a virtual CISO years ago. Uh, they have their own privacy laws in each of them that are again about protecting it. And so they're very specific and prescriptive about what to do. Europe has GDPR that came out about 8 years ago or 9 years ago that is about protecting of privacy data for Europe and European citizens, which may apply to US companies if you have customers in Europe or employees in Europe or do business in Europe. China has, I actually, article was never published, but I wrote an article for China Business Review 8 years ago on the China privacy laws, which is very interesting. Um, Whole other discussion on that. India has privacy laws. Australia also very big on that. So you can see some of these. So as an organization who may be multinational, it's really important. As a CISO, my peers who are in large multinational organizations need to understand these hundreds of different regulatory and privacy laws about protection of data, data isolation, data confinement. So, for instance, in Europe, you'll see that there, like for instance, Germany, there's data location laws. So no privacy data of German citizens can leave Germany. So there's a lot of, so Amazon, AWS, Google all have, Alibaba all have instances on German soil to store that data. Switzerland, very similar. And so, understanding what these all become important because data has many threats. And, this is a chart that I'm going to expand in a minute that I put together when I was a CISO 10, 15 years, I guess it was 2012. So whatever that was, 12 years ago. I was going through an ISO 27001 audit. And the auditor was in there and he was talking about like all the stuff we need to do. And I said, listen, I'm not building my program based on some list of things that someone 10 years ago put in a room who doesn't know my business put together. I'm basing it on protecting my business. And my business is about protecting the data. And so we have these data loss of integrity. And so classic CIA, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I also would add safety and privacy to the CIA triad. But data loss of intellectual property, sensitive data that we have under contract or under SLA, or I'm sorry, NDA, financial data, export control data, if you're in US government or other governments, there's the integrity of data. If I'm making business decision based on these data, then I need to make sure that it's accurate and it's available and it's usable. And then the impact of availability, right? I can't make decisions here in healthcare. People think that the privacy of healthcare information is like our biggest worry. It's not. Not that we don't worry about it, but it's the availability of data because doctors need to have access to data to make decisions to keep patients alive. And so if a hospital loses their data or the corruption of the data and people start dying, that's going to put a hospital out of business a lot faster than there's like a HIPAA breach that somebody accidentally, disclosed some information. So the availability of quality data is important to make these decisions. And then finally, the impact of safety. And the safety could be the safety of people, as I kind of referred to before, or environmental. If there's data about things that, if you're working in a, I as a virtual CISO, I had some oil companies and some refineries, and the protecting of those systems and the data that maintains the sensors of those systems. A valve closes and something may blow up, or a valve opens or it may flood an environment. So there's data and systems that are important. So all of this has many threats, and that's where I expand it. And this is what I wrote on my whiteboard. So I said, this is what I worry about, and this is what I worry about it from. And this is a chart. If you go to my LinkedIn, I have an article from like 5 years ago where I use this chart and I kind of explain it fully that I wrote. But if just to give some ideas, like there's a number of different threats here, some loss of devices, unauthorized device access, remote access, malicious software, insecure applications, configuration changes, network attacks, social engineering, malicious sites, removable media, and human error. So if we follow just the easy track from the left, so an employee, and then for the next level below is who are the actors, from employees to former employees to malicious insiders, partners, competitors, nation states, etc. And then a nation state may insert a malicious insider. I have that because that actually happened to me. So an employee through human error can lose a device and lose data. And you can see how that kind of goes. Or a former employee through a lingering account, could then through a remote access channel, steal data or corrupt data or things like that. So there's a lot of different elements. And so it's the protection of data is, has a broad threat landscape and a broad surface area, depending on what it is, because it's a number of different entry points and a number of different actors, which is what a threat model is. And so we have a question coming in about curious about all the compliance laws and how it's being affected by large language models and are scooping up data. Yep. So yeah, and that's would be a whole other keynote about AI. Europe very quickly and efficiently came out with their AI privacy rule. And part of it is about not using AI for, identifying people to use to, from a privacy standpoint, but also using identifying when AI is being used so people can make decisions on, is this data from a coming out of a model or coming from L, and a whole bunch of other things. They, like in rapid time, they say, let's get something out now and we'll do better. But yes, AI is becoming a really big issue because we don't know what's real and what's not. We and we have, and again, a whole other discussion. I had a meeting with this yesterday about people in AI governance yesterday, about understanding education to our staff or people about the use of AI, what is important, what's not important, on being able to tag it and knowing that it's there so we can make decisions if it's AI, and then the whole challenges with AI bias and things like that. But yes, the we're coming out with regulations, I guess we'll say, and it's actually going to start with the states. Um, there was a bunch of, and I have to go look at my notes because I wasn't going to talk about AI, but there was, I want to say it was Connecticut had the first law on graph, but Colorado was the first one to actually get it out of the gate. California is very quickly behind. So we're going to, just like with different privacy laws, we're going to see AI laws from the states, and maybe we'll lump it into a federal law here in the United States. But the states will kind of start with that. But yes, we're watching that very closely. And you know, trying to see what he can. Now, the scooping up of data kind of falls into some of the other rules that we have of being able to protect data. And that kind of leads into this, which was part of the question, but it also leads into this about other considerations. So I talked about the surface area. Look at all these things. I made a, I turned it, it was a big long line. I turned it into 3 columns of software as a service, infrastructure as a service, bulk storage, logs from all the things above, backups, data analytics. Whoops, that should have been a carriage return there. Anyway, databases and data lakes, test data versus production data in environments, because now it's so much easier to spin up environments in the cloud. Maybe there's something they talked about in the previous session. Posture management tools that are looking for security and things like that. So there's a lot of places where the data is, and there's whole categories of tools, security tools called data posture management tools that do the discovery of where's all the data, and then I can identify it and I can classify it and I can apply policy to it and I can apply rules to it, based on whether it's internal policy, regulatory things, or whatever. The next kind of area is this privacy. 10 years ago, I was on lots of privacy panels with lots of attorneys as a CISO. And, because in the cybersecurity world, we just think privacy is the confidentiality part, but it's not. Privacy is the appropriate use of data based on either regulation or consent of the person who give it to you. So that's why there's privacy statements and privacy notices on all websites of like, this is what we're collecting, this is why we're collecting it, this is how we store it, this is how we protect it, this is how you can act. And then in Europe, you have to requirement under GDPR, this is how you can access it, this is how you can submit us to remove it, this is who we share it with, this is how long we retain it, all these things need to be spelled out, and then you give consent for that, or you can say no and then not access the service. And so that's very different than saying, oh, I have sensitive financial data that I'm going to encrypt and I'm going to have only certain people access it. Um, because that is restricting based on use and not restricting based on, consent. So derived data, and the reason why I can have this is that there was famously 10 years ago, there was an incident at Target where um, uh, a father had coupons be mailed to him for prenatal vitamins. And it was like, why am I getting prenatal vitamins? Because Target knew that his daughter was pregnant before he did. And while it's a much longer story how they got that way, that is kind of come from derived data. And derived data is like Target had a a survey where they took pregnant women and they consented to have their data used of their buying habits as they go through certain terms of their certain the maturation of their pregnancy. And based on that data, they used it to then derive when other people match those, they could say, oh, you're pregnant because you started off by buying a pregnancy test and then prenatal vitamins and then doing this thing and starting blah, 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 blah. Folic acid, whatever. And it's like, okay, I'm seeing all these things. So therefore, and that's what's derived data is. So this, this gentleman's daughter did not consent, and this gentleman did not consent to having that, but it was derived from data that was already there that they knew about. That's like a big issue. Um, AI, we kind of talked about before based on the question. I appreciate the question. Um, just the security of the data, the bias of the models, the identification of the models, the use of the data, et cetera. Data encryption, masking, tokenization, which is the masking tokenization are ways to obfuscate data in a public way. So maybe I have to share data to be used to an analytic firm, and it's for data analytics, but it's healthcare data. So I'm going to tokenize it, and they're going to do analytics on data that's not the real data, but then I can convert it back. And then processes for data leakage, compliance, reporting, and sorting. So technology supports a process. And while we have all these rules, we need a process to be able to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover from those things when they happen. So what do we need to do? So I've admired the problem for 15 minutes. Now let me just get into the fixing of it. And that's where data governance come in. So data governance is this hierarchy of saying, I'm linking the business to the technology. And based on all the things I talked about until now, I have a need as a business to protect this data from a confidentiality, a privacy standpoint, and all these other things. And so there's a vision that context, people, process, technology, as we say here, and a life cycle of data, which includes the destroying, the archiving, which is the retention, which there may be regulations, financial regulations requiring retention for 7 years, so I can't destroy it, or certain things that are litigation, which may be longer, et cetera. So I understand the data life cycle, where it is, and how it works. And then from there, there's organizational structures of, okay, who are the data owners? Who are the data, custodians? And there's all these different groups that need to be involved, because the technical people don't make business decisions. We're just the ones that protect the data. So I'll pause here, and I have a couple other questions coming out. What role does automation tools and AI play in maintaining compliance and maintaining data governance? Yeah, they could be. If you understand what you're doing, one theory thing about AI, it's about, like you kind of alluded to, automation. It's if I have someone who all they do is stand there and do something, then think of AI that way. And so if I can always have somebody watching the gates and saying, hey, let me know if this happens, and et cetera. So yeah, I think there are definitely opportunities for that. And then what's the most significant recent changes in data protection regulations that we should be aware of? So I would say probably the AI ones, and then the privacy, the upcoming new Privacy Act that's maybe ratified this year. Um, and then there are certain ones that I kind of reference, the ones I referenced on the earlier slides, they're kind of coming up. But all of this is still just common sense. As a business, you want to protect your data that either makes you competitive, that is, your financial data before, if you're a public company, before you release it, because we all saw Trading Places 25 years ago, or 35 years, 40 years ago, where if they get the crop report early, someone's going to make a lot of money, and you may lose a lot of money. We have privacy data and regulated data, and so every industry kind of has these different things, payment card information, energy transmission, distribution. So, but it all boils down to what you're going to do, which is who has access to it, how long do they have access? Do they have rights to it? And, are they appropriate to have access to it? So a lot of it's still the fundamentals. There's nothing really, I wouldn't say it's new. If you're doing the right thing, I always say that compliance to regulation should be a reporting exercise. You're making a program and you're putting in controls to protect your business and what could impact your business. Not being compliant is an impact to the business. How big that is kind of dictates how much effort you put into compliance. You may just be checking a box and saying, yeah, I have that. It's not perfect, but it's compliant, because being compliant does not mean you're secure. And that's the important part. Um, Going back to the slide here, the people side of it is there is a hierarchy of data governance with different working groups, and it's a team effort. It's not just something the IT team or the security team does. And then finally, my last slide is just talking about the implementation of that. And so this is for cloud security. This says for cloud security. I took this from Dig, but I really like this because this goes through the data lifecycle anyway. I'm identifying data, I'm classifying it, I'm limiting access to it, I'm encrypting it in transit and rest. I have, posture management tools, which is what they do, of saying like what's the data doing and who has access to it and alerting to that. And then I have, the governance of what's the retention type, and am I appropriately destroying it? And am I removing it from all the places? Going back to, there's the thing that I got to put before, there's logs, there's tools, there's backups, there's all these different things that can be where the data is. It could be in the cloud, it could be on premise, it could be, in a vault somewhere, in Iron Mountain. And you need to know, you can't protect what you don't know exists. And so that's why the identification, that's why I kind of like this little 6-step thing here applies to any kind of data protection, even in your own home. And so you have your financial data and your deeds and your and your your car titles and things like that. Is like, okay, I know I have them in something that's, what are the risks to it? Well, there's fire is a risk to burning up a title or a deed. So I have it in a little fire case safe. I have access to it by a key. That key is only known by, me and my wife. I have, and this is a kind of effort. Is this enough, or do I need to put it elsewhere? Because maybe I have lots of things that are on paper and I need to store them another way. So we can do that correlation from there. So that's what I have from slides. And even though I talk fast, I have 3 more minutes if anyone has any other questions. So, okay, great. Thank you. So the next question: what ways have you seen companies successfully balance operational efficiency with the need to meet, stringent data privacy and security regulations? So that's the name of the game, and that's where governance comes in. Because if you ask a technical person and a security person, they're going to try to like, let's encrypt everything, lock it down, no one can access it, because that's my job. But reason why the data owners are saying, listen, we need to have access to it at this time. And I'll go back to hospitals. Like, we can't have abrasion among the doctors and nurses to be able to get to the data to do their job in a timely manner. And so that balance is why there's a steering committee to say, okay, we have a need to be compliant with this, but you have a need to be able to access the data quickly. How can we balance that with, technology or with process? And if one or the other is making the decision, then one is going to make it very insecure but easy to access, and the other is going to make it too secure and hard to access. Because as a CISO, I always say my number 2 rule of being a CISO is don't make your users your biggest hackers. Right? If they have to go around my controls to do their job, I failed. And so that is to the point of this question, which is a great question, is what's the balance? And the balance is the governance and the data owners and the business people, along with the technical people, get together and they say, all right, how do we come together to, we all get to achieve the goal that we need to achieve? And so that's really the core of it. I don't look at it as kind of like, you talk about stringent data privacy laws. I guess I'm a security guy of like, I think it's kind of common sense to me. But if you're not used to it and you're used to just everyone accessing the data for all the things, it makes it easy. The other thing we need to keep in mind is that, there's the Fortune 500 and then there's 5 million other companies, right? 99%, 99.9999% of the companies, you know, don't have, a CISO, they don't have resources, they don't have security team. And so, yes, I understand. And I guess I'm coming from a Fortune 22 company that it all makes sense to me, but 99% don't get that. And that's why it's important to have, people that do know to help you. Just like any small company has outside counsel to be able to help you with any legal contractual things, having an outside security person or a fractional CISO is also very important. A lot of my friends are retiring and becoming fractional CISOs. I came out of that work to be one inside again. But, you know, someone who understands it, can just come up with very simple ways to be able to set in some standards. Okay, we encrypt all the laptops using software as a service. The software as a service is encrypted. It has access control. It's maintained by these things. We have multi-factor authentication. Yes, it's being backed up for recovery. If in case something goes wrong, there are some fundamentals to security that make this, I guess, easy to implement when you know what you're doing. And so with that, I've hit my time limit. And I thank you so much for your attention. And this will be available later. And you can always reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm on LinkedIn. Otherwise, have a great day.
Great. And thank you again, Rick, for such an incredible keynote. And I want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Our next session will begin at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, which will be a thought leadership titled Optimal Offensive Security Programs. Please click on the join button that will appear on your screen to be redirected to the next session, and we look forward to seeing you there.